City girl Sophie Lane took a ranch job to escape her old life, never expecting to fall for the ruggedly handsome ranch hand who teaches her the ropes. But when she discovers Luke Callahan is actually the wealthy owner of Willow Creek Ranch, hiding his true identity, can she trust him with her heart? Or will their worlds prove too different to build a future together? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun cast long shadows across Willow Creek Ranch as Sophie Lane tightened the cinch on a chestnut mare's saddle. At 32, she still felt like the new girl, even after 6 months of working at the ranch. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her hands, once soft from office work, were now calloused and strong. "Easy, girl," Sophie whispered to the horse, who shifted nervously. "We're just going for a little ride today." "You've got away with her," came a deep voice from behind. It's from Duchess doesn't usually take to strangers so quick. Sophie turned to see Luke Callahan leaning against the stable door, his cowboy hat tipped low over his eyes. Even in the dim light of the barn, she could see his smile, the kind that made her stomach do a little flip every time. "Morning, Luke," she said, trying to sound casual. "Didn't expect to see you up this early." Luke chuckled. "The ranch doesn't run itself." He stepped forward and ran a hand along Duchess's neck. "Besides, I wanted to check if you were up for helping me mend the fence on the north pasture today." Sophie nodded, hoping he couldn't see the blush creeping up her cheeks. "Sure thing. I could use the practice." The truth was, Sophie would have agreed to clean out the stalls all day if it meant spending time with Luke. Unlike the other ranch hands who treated her like she was made of glass or didn't belong, Luke had welcomed her from day one. He taught her the things she needed to know without making her feel stupid for not knowing them already. After finishing with Duchess, Sophie followed Luke to his pickup truck. The old Ford had seen better days, but it rumbled to life with a comforting growl as they headed toward the north pasture. "So," Luke said, his eyes on the dirt road ahead, "what brought you to Willow Creek?" "Don't get many city folks looking to wrangle cattle." Sophie looked out the window at the rolling hills. "Needed a change, I guess. Lost my job at the insurance company in Denver when they downsized. Then my apartment lease ended, and it just felt like a sign to try something new." What she didn't say was how lost she had felt, how the city had started to suffocate her after years of grinding away at a job she hated. How the ad for a ranch hand at Willow Creek had seemed like an escape, a rope when she was drowning. "Well, I'd say you made the right choice," Luke said with a sideways glance. "You're a natural out here." They reached the broken section of fence, and Sophie helped unload the tools and lumber from the truck bed. As they worked side by side, the morning heat built up, and Sophie found herself stealing glances at Luke. The way his muscles moved under, his worn flannel shirt, the concentration in his eyes as he lined up a nail, the genuine smile he gave her when he caught her looking. "So who owns all this land anyway?" Sophie asked, wiping sweat from her brow. "I just realized I've never met the boss." A strange expression crossed Luke's face, something like hesitation. "The Callahan family," he said after a beat. "Old ranching dynasty. The current owner stays pretty hands-off, lets the foreman run things." "Must be nice," Sophie said, hammering a nail with more force than necessary. "To have so much you don't even need to look after it yourself." Luke's shoulders tensed slightly. Maybe he has his reasons. They worked in silence for a while, the rhythm of their hammers filling the space between them. By noon the fence was fixed, and they sat in the shade of an old oak tree, sharing the lunch Sophie had packed. "This is delicious," Luke said, biting. "And to a sandwich." "You cook too. Is there anything you can't do, Sophie Lane?" Sophie laughed. "Plenty. But after years of fending for myself, you pick up a few things." "Well, the ranch is lucky to have you," Luke said, his voice soft and sincere. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Sophie felt like something important was happening, something that made her heart beat faster and her breath catch in her throat. The moment was broken by the sound of an approaching vehicle. A sleek black SUV came to a stop nearby, and a woman in an expensive-looking pantsuit stepped out, her high heels completely impractical for ranch life. "Luke," she called, waving an elegant hand. "There you are. I've been looking all over for you." Luke stood quickly, his expression suddenly guarded. "Victoria," he said, his tone cooler than Sophie had ever heard it. "What are you doing here?" Woman, Victoria, approached them, her eyes briefly flicking to Sophie before dismissing her entirely. "Your father's lawyer called. There are papers that need your signature right away." She held up a leather portfolio. "I offered to bring them out since I was in the area." Sophie watched, confused, as Luke's jaw tightened. This woman clearly knew him, but she spoke to him with a familiarity that didn't match what Sophie knew about Luke, that he was just another ranch hand like her. "I'll catch up with you later," Luke said to Sophie, his voice strained. "Thanks for your help today." Without another word, he walked off with Victoria, leaving Sophie alone under the oak tree, feeling suddenly like an outsider. Back at the main ranch house that evening, Sophie was brushing down Duchess when she overheard voices coming from the office. The window was cracked open, and though she tried not to eavesdrop, she couldn't help but hear the heated conversation inside. "You can't keep playing cowboy forever, Lucas," said a woman's voice, Victoria's. "The board is getting impatient. Your father built this company, and now you're hiding out here pretending to be someone you're not." "This isn't hiding," came Luke's reply, his voice firm. "This is living, Victoria. Something you wouldn't understand." "Living?" Victoria laughed. A sharp sound. "Lucas Callahan III, heir to Callahan Enterprises and owner of this entire ranch, mucking stalls and fixing fences? What would your father say?" Sophie froze, the brush still in her hand. Owner? Luke was the owner of Willow Creek Ranch? The man she'd been working alongside, laughing with, maybe even falling for, wasn't just another employee. He was her boss. And he'd lied to her face when she'd asked about the owner just hours ago. "My father would say it's my life," Luke, or Lucas, was saying. "And I'll live it how I want. Now take these papers back to Palmer and tell him I'll look them over when I'm ready." "Fine," Victoria snapped, "but sooner or later you'll have to stop pretending and take your rightful place. You can't run from who you are forever, Lucas." Sophie backed away from the window, her mind racing. Everything made sense now. The respect the other ranch hands showed him, how he seemed to know every inch of the property, the way the foreman always deferred to his decisions. She felt like a fool. All this time she'd thought they were equals, just two people trying to make their way in the world. But he was a millionaire playing at being a cowboy, and she was just... what? Part of his little experiment in real living? Sophie put Duchess back in her stall and headed for her cabin, one of several small houses on the property where the ranch hands lived. Her mind was a whirl of confusion and hurt. She wasn't sure what bothered her more, that Luke had lied or that she'd been naive enough to believe they might have had a genuine connection. The next morning, Sophie was up before dawn, determined to avoid Luke, or Lucas, whatever his name was. But as she headed to the stables, there he was, waiting for her by the corral fence, 2 steaming mugs in his hands. "Coffee?" he offered, holding one out to her. Sophie hesitated, then took it. "Thanks," she said coolly. Luke seemed to notice her change in demeanor. "Everything okay?" For a moment, Sophie considered saying nothing, just going about her day and keeping her distance. But the hurt and confusion of the previous day bubbled up inside her. "I don't know, Lucas," she said, emphasizing his full name. "You tell me." The color drained from Luke's face. "Sophie, were you ever going to tell me?" she asked, cutting him off. "Or was it fun for you watching me struggle to learn the ropes while you pretended to be just another worker?" Luke stepped closer, his eyes pleading. "It wasn't like that." Save it," Sophie said, setting down the untouched coffee. "I get it. The rich guy wanted to play cowboy, see how the other half lives. Well, I'm not part of your game." She turned to walk away, but Luke caught her arm gently. "Sophie, please, let me explain." Sophie looked at his hand on her arm, then back up at his face. Despite her anger, seeing the genuine distress in his eyes made her hesitate. "Fine," she said finally. "Explain." Before Luke could speak, the ranch foreman, Frank, approached them. "Boss, sorry to interrupt, but we've got trouble. Fence is down on the east side, and some of the cattle have gotten out. Storm last night. Must have knocked over that old oak." Luke looked torn, his eyes still on Sophie. "I'll be right there, Frank." As the foreman walked away, Luke turned back to her. "We need to talk, Sophie, please. Meet me at the old fishing cabin by the lake tonight after dinner. I'll tell you everything, I promise." Sophie wanted to refuse, to hold on to her anger. But something in his voice, a vulnerability she hadn't heard before, made her nod. "Fine, the fishing cabin, but I want the truth, Luke, all of it." "You'll get it," he said, relief clear in his voice. "And Sophie, I never meant to hurt you." As she watched him walk away to deal with the escaped cattle, Sophie wondered if she was making a mistake by agreeing to meet him. Trust, once broken, wasn't easily repaired. But despite everything, there was a part of her that wanted to believe him, that wanted there to be more to the story. The sun climbed higher in the sky as Sophie went about her chores, her mind replaying every moment she'd spent with Luke, trying to see if there had been clues she'd missed. By the time evening came, she still didn't know what to think, but she knew she needed answers. As the last light of day faded from the sky, Sophie headed toward the old fishing cabin by the lake, her heart pounding with uncertainty about what lay ahead. The fishing cabin sat on the edge of the lake, its weathered wood glowing amber in the light of the setting sun. Sophie hesitated at the tree line, watching smoke curl from the chimney. She almost turned back, still hurt by Luke's deception, but she needed answers more than she needed to nurse her pride. As she approached, the cabin door opened, and Luke stepped out onto the small porch. He'd changed out of his work clothes into jeans and a clean button-down shirt, his hair still damp like he'd just showered. "You came," he said, relief clear in his voice. "I said I would." Sophie crossed her arms. "That's the difference between us. I keep my word." Luke winced. "I deserve that. Please come in. It's getting cold out here." Inside, the cabin was simple but comfortable, with a small kitchenette, a worn leather couch, and a stone fireplace where a fire crackled. The walls were decorated with old fishing gear and faded photographs. "This was my grandfather's place," Luke said, gesturing for her to sit. "He built it himself when he first bought this land. Used to bring me here on weekends when I was a kid." Sophie remained standing. "Is that supposed to make me feel better, learning more about your privileged childhood?" Luke sighed, running a hand through his hair. "No, I'm trying to explain who I am, the real me." "That's the problem, Luke, or should I say Lucas. I don't know who the real you is anymore." "It's just Luke," he said firmly. "Lucas Callahan III is a name on legal documents and boardroom doors. Luke is who I've always been to the people who actually know me." He moved to the kitchenette and poured 2 cups of coffee, offering one to Sophie. This time she took it, if only to have something to do with her hands. "Why the charade?" she asked. "Why pretend to be just another ranch hand?" Luke leaned against the counter, his eyes meeting hers. "When I took over the ranch after my father died 2 years ago, I intended to run things from the main office in town like he did. But on my first day here, I overheard some of the workers talking. They were betting on how long before the city boy heir would sell the place to developers." He took a sip of his coffee. "So I decided to prove myself. I told Frank, he's the only one who knows besides you now, that I wanted to learn the business. From the ground up. No special treatment, no shortcuts. And it never occurred to you that lying to everyone might be a problem?" Sophie asked. "I didn't lie. Not exactly. Everyone just assumed I was a new hire, and I didn't correct them. The only person I actually lied to was you yesterday, when you asked about the owner." His eyes softened. "And I've been kicking myself for it ever since." Sophie shook her head. "A lie of omission is still a lie, Luke." "You're right," he agreed. "But can you honestly tell me you would have treated me the same if you'd known who I was from the beginning?" The question caught Sophie off guard. Would she have been as open with him, as natural around him, if she'd known he was her boss? Probably not. "That's not the point," she said, but her voice had lost some of its edge. Luke moved to the fireplace, stoking the flames. "When I met you, that first day, Sophie, you were so determined to prove yourself. You didn't care that the work was hard or that some of the guys gave you a hard time. You just wanted a chance to show what you could do." He turned back to face her. "I admired that. And as I got to know you, I admired you more. You're smart, you're kind, you work harder than anyone I've ever met. I didn't want to be the boss to you. I just wanted to be Luke." Despite herself, Sophie felt her resolve weakening. There was a sincerity in his eyes that was hard to doubt. She sank down onto the couch, cradling her coffee. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Everyone finds out you're the big boss and things go back to normal." Luke sat beside her, careful to leave space between them. Nothing has to change. Frank's handled the business side of things fine these past 2 years. I can keep working alongside you, keep learning the ranch the way I have been. And Victoria, Sophie couldn't help asking. Who is she to you? A shadow crossed Luke's face. Victoria Palmer. Her father is my family's lawyer. We grew up together, went to the same schools. Our parents always hoped we'd end up together. And did you? Sophie held her breath, unsure why his answer seemed so important. No, Luke said firmly. We dated briefly in college, but we want different things from life. Victoria sees the ranch as an investment, something to be managed for profit. I see it as a legacy, a place worth preserving. He looked at Sophie intently. That's what I've been trying to figure out these past 2 years. What kind of legacy I want to build, and meeting you has helped me see it more clearly. Sophie felt a flutter in her chest but pushed it down. I'm still not sure I can trust you. I understand that, Luke said, but I'm hoping you'll give me a chance to earn back that trust. Before Sophie could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and frowned. What is it? Luke asked. Mandy, Sophie said, referring to one of the other ranch hands. She says there's a problem with Duchess. She's acting strange and won't eat. Luke was on his feet instantly. Let's go. They drove back to the ranch in Luke's truck, the tension between them momentarily set aside by their shared concern for the horse. When they reached the stables, Mandy was waiting outside Duchess's stall. She's been pacing and sweating, Mandy explained, and she keeps looking at her side like something's bothering her. Luke entered the stall carefully, Sophie right behind him. The chestnut mare was indeed sweating, her sides heaving, her eyes wide with distress. Colic, Luke and Sophie said in unison. I'll call the vet, Mandy said, already pulling out her phone. She might not get here in time, Luke said, his voice calm but urgent. Sophie, help me walk her. We need to keep her moving. For the next hour they worked together, leading Duchess back and forth, monitoring her vital signs, administering medicine when the vet called with instructions. Sophie watched as Luke spoke soothingly to the horse, his hand steady and sure as he checked her gums for signs of dehydration. This was the Luke she knew, capable, compassionate, someone who cared deeply about the animals in his charge. It was hard to reconcile this man with the image of a wealthy heir playing at ranch life. By the time the vet arrived, Duchess was showing signs of improvement. Dr. Harlow checked her over thoroughly and nodded in approval. You two did good work, she said. Another hour without treatment and we might have been looking at surgery. After the vet left, Sophie and Luke sat on bales of hay outside the stall, keeping watch over Duchess. The adrenaline of the emergency was wearing off, leaving Sophie exhausted. Thank you, Luke said quietly. I couldn't have handled that alone, Sophie nodded. It's my job. Is that all it is? He asked, his eyes searching her face. Before she could answer, Frank appeared at the stable door. Everything okay in here? Mandy told me about Duchess. She'll be fine, Luke assured him. Thanks to Sophie. Frank nodded, his eyes moving between them. Good work. Oh, and boss? Miss Palmer called the main house, said she needs to speak with you urgently about those papers. Sophie stiffened at the mention of Victoria, reality crashing back in. Frank's casual use of boss was a stark reminder of who Luke really was. Tell her I'll call her tomorrow, Luke said, his eyes still on Sophie. Frank hesitated. She was pretty insistent. Something about a board meeting and proxy votes. Luke sighed. Fine, I'll be there in a minute. After Frank left, an uncomfortable silence fell between them. Sophie stood, brushing hay from her jeans. You should go, sounds important. It can wait, Luke said, standing as well. We weren't finished talking. I think we were, Sophie replied. You have a whole other life waiting for you, Luke. Board, meetings and proxy votes and whatever else comes with being Lucas Callahan III. You don't need to keep pretending to be just another ranch hand. That's not what I'm doing, Luke protested. Sophie, the way I feel about— Don't, she cut him off. Please, I need time to think. Luke looked like he wanted to say more, but he nodded. Okay, take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready to talk. He left and Sophie sank back down onto the hay bale, her emotions in turmoil. Working with Luke to save Duchess had reminded her of all the things she'd come to admire about him. But could she really trust him again? And even if she could, what future could there be between someone like her and someone like him? The next morning, Sophie was surprised to find Luke back in his work clothes, helping to muck out stalls as if nothing had changed. When he saw her, he smiled hesitantly. "Morning," he said. "What are you doing?" she asked. "My job," he replied simply. "Just like every other day." Before Sophie could respond, they heard the rumble of vehicles approaching. Looking out of the stable door, they saw 3 black SUVs pulling up to the main house. Victoria Palmer stepped out of the first one, followed by several men in business suits. "Luke?" Sophie looked at him questioningly. His expression darkened. "The board members. They weren't supposed to be here until next week." Victoria spotted them and walked over. Her high heels sinking slightly into the dirt. "Lucas," she called, "there you are. We've been trying to reach you." "I told Frank I'd call you today," Luke said, his tone cool. Victoria's eyes flicked to Sophie, then back to Luke. "This couldn't wait. The Reynolds Group has made an offer on the North Ridge property. It's an incredible opportunity, but they need an answer today." "The North Ridge isn't for sale," Luke said firmly. Victoria's perfectly plucked eyebrows rose. "It's nearly $100 million, Lucas. The board is unanimously in favor." "I don't care what the board thinks," Luke replied. "That land has been in my family for generations. I'm not selling it to be turned into luxury condos." One of the suited men approached them. "Mr. Callahan, if we could just have a few minutes of your time to discuss the details." "There's nothing to discuss," Luke cut him off. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." Victoria grabbed his arm as he turned to leave. "This is exactly what I was talking about, Lucas. You can't keep hiding out here playing cowboy while there's real business to handle. Your father would be ashamed." Something snapped in Luke's eyes. "My father worked himself into an early grave for this company, Victoria. He missed my graduations, my birthdays, every important moment of my life because there was real business to handle. I won't make the same mistake." He looked at the assembled board members. "The North Ridge is not for sale, not now, not ever. If you want to discuss legitimate business opportunities that don't involve selling off pieces of Callahan land, I'll be in the office on Monday." With that, he walked back into the stable, leaving Victoria and the board members staring after him in shock. Sophie followed him inside, finding him angrily throwing fresh hay into Duchess's stall. "Luke," she said softly. He paused, his shoulders tense. "I'm sorry you had to see that. Did you mean what you said about not selling the land?" Luke turned to face her. "Every word. This ranch isn't just a business to me, Sophie. It's my home. These people, these animals, they matter to me." Sophie stepped closer. "And is that why you've been working alongside us, because we matter to you?" "Yes," he said without hesitation, "especially you." The honesty in his voice made Sophie's heart skip, but before she could respond, they heard a commotion outside. Through the stable door, they could see Victoria arguing with Frank, her voice carrying across the yard. "He's making a huge mistake," she was saying. "Lucas doesn't understand what's at stake here. That offer won't be on the table forever." "Ms. Palmer," Frank replied calmly, "the boss has made his decision. I think it's time for you and your colleagues to leave." Victoria's face flushed with anger. This isn't over. When his father's company starts losing value because he's too sentimental to make smart business decisions, he'll regret this. She stormed back to the SUVs, the board members following reluctantly. As they drove away, Sophie looked at Luke. "You really stood up to them," she said, a note of admiration in her voice. "It was about time someone did," Luke replied. "They've been pushing to sell off pieces of the ranch since my father died. I've been putting them off, but today," he glanced at Sophie, "today I realize some things are worth fighting for." Their eyes met, and Sophie felt the wall she'd built around her heart beginning to crumble. But there were still so many questions, so many doubts. "Luke," she began. "Boss," Frank called from outside. "Got a call from the Johnson place. Their cattle broke through the fence again and are mixing with ours in the south pasture." Luke sighed. "Never a dull moment." "We'll talk later," Sophie nodded. "Later?" As she watched him head out with Frank, Sophie felt more confused than ever. The man who had just stood up to a room full of executives to protect his family's land was the same man who had spent months working beside her, getting his hands dirty, learning every aspect of ranch life. Maybe there was more to Luke Callahan than she had thought, and maybe, just maybe, she was ready to find out what that meant for them both. The South Pasture was chaos when Sophie arrived. Ranch hands on horseback were trying to separate the Johnson cattle from the Callahan herd, shouting instructions to each other over the dust and noise. Sophie quickly saddled up a horse and rode out to help, spotting Luke on his black stallion directing the operation. "Sophie," he called when he saw her, "take the east side. We need to move our cattle toward the creek." For the next few hours, they worked tirelessly under the hot sun. Sophie lost herself in the rhythm of the work, the focus it required pushing aside her confused feelings about Luke. There was something honest about this labor that couldn't be faked. Either you knew what you were doing or you didn't, and Luke definitely knew what he was doing. He rode like he'd been born in the saddle, anticipating the movements of the cattle, giving clear directions to the other hands. This wasn't a rich man playing cowboy. This was someone who understood ranch life down to his bones. By late afternoon, they had separated the herds and were driving the Johnson cattle back toward their own ranch. Luke rode up beside Sophie, his shirt soaked with sweat, his face streaked with dirt but his eyes bright with satisfaction. "Good work today," he said. "You handled yourself like a pro out there." Despite herself, Sophie smiled. "Thanks. You weren't so bad yourself for a city boy." Luke laughed, a genuine sound that made something warm unfurl in Sophie's chest. Haven't been called that in a while. They rode in companionable silence for a moment before Luke spoke again. "Look, about yesterday." "It's okay," Sophie interrupted. "I get it, you had your reasons." "Still," Luke said, "I should have told you the truth sooner, especially once we became friends." Friends. The word hung in the air between them, somehow both true and not enough to describe what had been growing between them these past months. "Is that what we are?" Sophie asked, surprising herself with her boldness. "Friends?" Luke reined his horse to a stop and Sophie did the same. The other ranch hands continued ahead with the cattle, leaving them alone on the ridge. "I'd like to think we're more than that," Luke said quietly. "Or we could be if you'd give me a chance." Sophie looked at him, really looked at him. Not Lucas Callahan III, heir to the Callahan fortune, but Luke, the man who had taught her to rope cattle, who stayed up all night, with sick animals, who knew every inch of this land and loved it with a passion that matched her own. "I don't know, Luke," she said honestly. "There's still so much I don't know about you, about your life." "Then let me show you," he said. "Come to dinner at the main house tonight. No more secrets." After a moment's hesitation, Sophie nodded. "Okay, dinner." The main house was a sprawling ranch-style home that Sophie had only seen from a distance. As she approached that evening, freshly showered and wearing the nicest clothes she'd brought to the ranch, a simple blue dress and boots, she couldn't help feeling nervous. Luke met her at the door, also cleaned up, wearing dark jeans and a button-down shirt that made him look both handsome and slightly uncomfortable, as if he preferred his work clothes. "You look beautiful," he said, his eyes appreciative but respectful. "Thanks," Sophie replied, feeling a blush creep up her cheeks. "You clean up pretty well yourself." Inside, the house was spacious but surprisingly homey, with comfortable furniture, family photographs and Western artwork on the walls. Not the mansion she'd been expecting. "It's not what you thought, is it?" Luke asked, reading her expression. Sophie shook her head. "I was picturing something more pretentious," Luke supplied with a smile. "That would be the penthouse in Denver. This was always meant to be a working ranch house. My grandfather built it that way, and my father never changed it, even after the business took off." He led her into a dining room where the table was set for two, candles lit, the smell of something delicious wafting from the kitchen. "Did you cook?" Sophie asked, surprised. Luke laughed. "God, no. Rosa, our housekeeper, took pity on me when I told her I had a guest. She left everything warming in the oven before she went home. I just had to pour the wine." Dinner was surprisingly relaxed, the food delicious and the conversation easy. Luke told Sophie about growing up divided between two worlds, summers at the ranch with his grandfather, learning to ride and work the land, and the rest of the year in Denver with his father. Being groomed to take over the family business. My father built Callahan Enterprises from this ranch, Luke explained as they finished their meal. Started with cattle, then expanded into real estate, then investments. By the time I was born, he was barely ever here. But my grandfather still ran the ranch then, and he made sure I knew where we came from. You loved him, Sophie observed. Luke nodded, his eyes distant with memory. He was more of a father to me than my own dad in a lot of ways. He taught me that this land isn't just property, it's a responsibility. The people who work here, the animals, even the wild spaces, they all depend on us to do right by them. Is that why you came back? To honor your grandfather? Partly, Luke admitted. After he died, the ranch started to decline. My father saw it as just another asset. When he passed away 2 years ago, I realized if I didn't step in, the board would sell it off piece by piece until there was nothing left. So you decided to learn it from the ground up, Sophie said, understanding dawning. That's why you kept your identity secret. Luke nodded. I needed to earn the respect of the people who work here. Not as the boss's son who inherited everything, but as someone who understands the work and is willing to do it alongside them. After dinner, Luke showed Sophie around the house, pointing out family photographs and telling her stories about his childhood. In the study, he paused before a large portrait of an older man in rancher's clothes. Your grandfather? Sophie asked. Yes, Luke said softly. William Callahan. He built this ranch from nothing after the war. Sophie studied the painting, seeing the resemblance between the man in the portrait and Luke, the same determined set of the jaw, the same kind eyes. He would have liked you, Luke said, his voice close behind her. Sophie turned, surprised to find him standing so near. How do you know? Because you see the ranch the way he did. Not as a business, but as a way of life. Luke's eyes held hers. That's rare these days. The moment stretched between them, charged with something that had been building for months. Then the sound of a car pulling up outside broke the spell. Luke frowned, moving to the window. I'm not expecting anyone. They went to the front. Stayed all together. Victoria Palmer was striding up the path, a folder of papers in her hand. She stopped short when she saw Sophie standing beside Luke. Oh, she said, her surprise quickly masked by a polite smile. I didn't realize you had company, Lucas. Victoria, Luke acknowledged coolly. What are you doing here? Victoria held up the folder. The Reynolds Group revised their offer. The board thought you should see it right away. Luke's jaw tightened. I already told you, the North Ridge isn't for sale. At least look at the numbers before you decide, Victoria pressed, stepping forward. They're offering well above market value. I don't care if they're offering twice what it's worth, Luke replied firmly. That land was my grandfather's favorite. Spot on the whole ranch, he's buried there. Victoria sighed. Lucas, this sentimentality is going to cost the company millions. Your father would never... My father isn't here, Luke cut her off. I am, and I'm not selling. Victoria's eyes narrowed, then shifted to Sophie. I see. Perhaps your attachment to the ranch has more to do with its current employees than family history. The insinuation in her tone made Sophie bristle, but before she could respond, Luke stepped forward. That's enough, Victoria, he said, his voice quiet but steel. Sophie is an excellent ranch hand who cares about Willow Creek as much as I do. But even if she weren't here, my decision would be the same. Victoria's perfect composure slipped for a moment, showing a flash of hurt and anger. You've changed, Lucas. You used to understand what was important. No, Luke replied. I finally remembered what's important. After Victoria left, an awkward silence fell between Luke and Sophie. I'm sorry about that, Luke said finally. Victoria and I have known each other since we were kids. Our families always expected us to end up together. And you didn't want that? Sophie asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. Luke shook his head. We want different things. Victoria sees the ranch as a liability, something to be managed or sold for profit. She doesn't understand why I'd rather be out fixing fences than sitting in board meetings. He stepped closer to Sophie. She doesn't understand why spending these last months working alongside people like you has made me happier than I've been in years. Sophie's heart quickened. Luke, I know there's still a lot we don't know about each other, he continued. And I know I hurt you by not being honest. From the beginning. But I've never felt more myself than when I'm with you, Sophie. He reached for her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she let him take it. His palm was warm and calloused against hers, the hand of a man who worked for a living despite his wealth. I'd like a chance to show you who I really am, Luke said softly. No more secrets, no more pretending, just us. Sophie looked up at him, at the sincerity in his eyes, and felt the last of her doubts begin to fade. I'd like that too. He walked her back to her cabin in the moonlight, their hands linked, talking about everything and nothing. At her door he paused. There's a county fair this weekend in town, he said. Would you like to go with me? Sophie smiled. Like a date? Exactly like a date, Luke confirmed, his eyes crinkling at the corners. I'd like that, Sophie said. Luke's smile widened. Good night, Sophie Lane. He leaned in and pressed a gentle kiss to her cheek, then turned and walked away, looking back once with a smile that made her heart flip. Sophie watched him go, a mixture of hope and apprehension swirling inside her. She was falling for Luke. Callahan, the real Luke, a complex man caught between two worlds. But could someone like her really fit into his life? The weekend came quickly, and Sophie found herself both excited and nervous as she got ready for the fair. She chose a sundress she rarely had occasion to wear at the ranch and let her hair fall loose around her shoulders. Luke picked her up in his old Ford pickup rather than one of the luxury vehicles she now knew he owned. She appreciated the gesture. His way of showing her he meant what he said about being himself. With her, the county fair was alive with lights, music, and the smell of fair food. As they walked through the crowds, Luke took her hand, his touch sending warmth up her arm. What do you want to do first? He asked. Sophie grinned. Ferris wheel? I haven't been on one since I was a kid. They rode the Ferris wheel, ate cotton candy, and tried their luck at the carnival games. Luke won a stuffed horse at the ring toss and presented it to Sophie with a flourish that made her laugh. As the evening went on, Sophie noticed something strange. Luke seemed to know everyone. Farmers stopped to shake his hand, local business. Owners greeted him warmly. Elderly women patted his cheek and asked how he was doing. You really are part of this community, Sophie observed as they sat on a bench, sharing a funnel cake. Luke nodded. I grew up spending summers here, remember? These people have known me since I was in diapers. To them, I'm just Billy Callahan's grandson. Not the big-shot CEO, Luke snorted. Mrs. Henderson back there changed my diapers. She couldn't care. Less about my corporate title, Sophie laughed, feeling more relaxed than she had in days. This was the Luke she'd come to care for, unpretentious, kind, with an easy smile and a natural way with people. As they walked back toward the parking lot later that night, a man in a suit approached them, a reporter's notebook in hand. Mr. Callahan, he called. Ben Howard from the Denver Business Journal. Can I get a comment about the Reynolds deal? Sources say you turned down a $100 million offer for the North Ridge property. Luke stiffened. No comment. Is it true you've been working as a ranch hand for the past 2 years? The reporter pressed. And is this your girlfriend? What's your name, miss? Sophie felt Luke's hand tighten around hers as he stepped between her and the reporter. That's enough. This is a private evening. The business community is very interested in your unconventional management style, Mr. Callahan, the reporter persisted. Some of your board members have expressed concerns. I said no comment, Luke repeated firmly. Now please excuse us. He led Sophie quickly to his truck, his jaw tight with anger. Once they were inside, he slammed his hand against the steering wheel in frustration. I'm sorry about that, he said. I didn't think anyone from the Denver press would be here. It's okay, Sophie assured him, though the encounter had left her unsettled. Is it always like that for you? Luke sighed. Not usually, but the Reynolds deal has gotten some attention. It's a lot of money to turn down. It must be hard, Sophie said quietly. Having your personal life be public business. It comes with the territory, Luke replied. But it's one of the reasons I've kept a low profile these past couple of years. He started the truck but didn't put it in gear, instead turning to face her. Sophie, I need you to know something. What that reporter interrupted. This evening, it's real to me. It's not some game or distraction. You're not just the ranch hand I happen to be dating. You're the woman I've been falling for since the day you arrived at Willow Creek. Sophie's breath caught at the intensity in his eyes. Luke, you don't have to say anything, he quickly added. I know this is complicated. I just needed you to know where I stand. Sophie reached for his hand. I've been falling for you too. The real you. Not Lucas Callahan the millionaire, but Luke, the man who loves this ranch, who works harder than anyone I know, who treats everyone with respect whether they're a ranch hand or a board member. Luke's expression softened, his eyes never leaving hers. Can I kiss you, Sophie Lane? She nodded, and he leaned across the seat, one hand gently cupping her face as his lips met hers. The kiss was tender at first, then deepened as Sophie's arms went around his neck, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. Luke rested his forehead against hers, his thumb tracing her cheek. We should probably get back to the ranch, he murmured, though he made no move to start driving. Sophie smiled. Probably. The drive back to Willow Creek was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence, filled with stolen glances and small smiles. When they reached Sophie's cabin, Luke walked her to the door. Thank you for tonight, she said. It was perfect. Even with the nosy reporter? Luke asked, with a rueful smile. Even with him, Sophie confirmed. Because I was with you. Luke kissed her again, lingering and sweet, before reluctantly saying goodnight. Sophie watched him drive away, her heart full and her mind racing with possibilities she'd never allowed herself to consider before. The next morning, Sophie woke early as usual and headed to the stables. She was surprised to find several of the ranch hands gathered around Frank, all looking at a newspaper. Morning, she greeted them. What's going on? The group fell silent, exchanging uncomfortable glances. Frank handed her the paper without a word. There on the front page of the local section was a photo of her and Luke at the fair, his arm around her shoulders as they laughed together. The headline made her stomach drop. Callahan heir finds love with ranch employee, business tycoon. Trades boardroom for barn. The article was full of speculation about their relationship. Quotes from anonymous sources close to the Callahan family, expressing concern about Luke's commitment to the business and thinly veiled insinuations about Sophie's motives. Gold digging. Former insurance clerk Sophie Lane seems to have captured the heart of one of Colorado's most eligible bachelors. One particularly vicious paragraph began, Sophie felt the blood drain from her face. How did they know she used to work at an insurance company? Who had told them her name? Don't let it get to you, Frank said kindly. These tabloid vultures will print anything for a story. Sophie nodded numbly, but the damage was done. The other ranch hands were looking at her differently now. Some curious, some suspicious. Her private life was suddenly public property. Her relationship with Luke dissected and judged before it had barely begun. And somewhere in Denver, Victoria Palmer was reading this same article, perhaps even smiling at the chaos she had almost certainly helped create. Sophie stared at the newspaper, a sick feeling in her stomach. The photo of her and Luke was innocent enough, just the two of them enjoying the fair. But the words beneath it twisted their relationship into something tawdry and suspicious. You okay? Frank asked quietly as the other ranch hands dispersed, still throwing curious glances her way. I'm fine, Sophie said automatically, though she was anything but. Is Luke up at the main house? Frank nodded. Saw him heading that way about an hour ago. You might want to check his office. Sophie folded the newspaper and walked toward the main house, her mind racing. She'd known dating Luke would be complicated, but she hadn't expected to become tabloid fodder overnight. More disturbing was how the reporter had learned details about her past. Someone had been digging into her life. When she reached the main house, Rosa, the housekeeper, directed her to Luke's office. The door was ajar, and she could hear his raised voice inside. I don't care what it costs, Luke was saying firmly. I want a retraction and an apology, or we're filing a lawsuit for defamation. The article is full of lies about Ms. Lane, and I won't stand for it. Sophie knocked lightly on the doorframe. Luke looked up, phone pressed to his ear, his expression softening when he saw her. I'll call you back, he said into the phone, then ended the call and stood. "Sophie, I was just about to come find you. I saw the paper," she said, holding up the folded newspaper. Luke's face darkened. "I'm so sorry. I've got my lawyer demanding a retraction. The things they wrote about you—" "How did they know where I used to work?" Sophie asked, the question that had been bothering her most. "Or my full name? I never mentioned those things to that reporter." Luke ran a hand through his hair, looking troubled. "Someone gave them information about you, someone who knew those details." "Victoria," Sophie said, the pieces falling into place. "She was angry after you rejected the Reynolds offer again." "Probably," Luke agreed grimly. "It would be like her to tip off the press, though she'll deny it if confronted." Sophie sank into a chair, the reality of dating someone like Luke Callahan hitting her full force. Is this what it's going to be like? Reporters, gossip, people digging into my past? Luke knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. "No. I promise I won't let this happen again. I've been too passive about protecting my privacy, but that ends now." "It's not just about privacy," Sophie said. "Did you see how the other ranch hands looked at me this morning? Like I've been playing some angle this whole time, like our relationship is just about your money." "They know you better than that," Luke insisted. "They've worked alongside you for months. They've seen your dedication to the ranch. But now they'll wonder if that was all an act," Sophie replied. "If I was just trying to get close to the boss—" Luke squeezed her hands. "Give them more credit, and give yourself more credit. Anyone who knows you knows you're not like that." Sophie wanted to believe him, but doubt had taken root. "Maybe we're being naive, Luke. Your world and mine, they're just so different." "No," Luke said firmly. "That's what I've been trying to tell you. There aren't two worlds. There's just this one, where I'm a man who loves this ranch and is falling in love with an amazing woman who happens to work here." Sophie's heart stuttered at his words. "Falling in love?" Luke's eyes held hers, unflinching. "Yes. I love you, Sophie Lane, and I don't care who knows it or what they think about it." Before Sophie could respond, the office door burst open. Victoria Palmer stormed in, her face flushed with anger, another newspaper clutched in her hand. "Have you seen this?" she demanded, waving the paper. "It's in every major paper in Denver. The board is in an uproar. Your father's investors are calling, demanding to know what's going on." She stopped short when she saw Sophie sitting there. Luke kneeling in front of her, her eyes narrowed. "I see," she said coldly. "Well, at least now we know why you've been rejecting perfectly good business opportunities. You've been distracted." Luke stood, his expression hardening. "That's enough, Victoria. Sophie and I were having a private conversation." "Nothing is private anymore, Lucas," Victoria snapped. "Not when you're throwing away your family's legacy for some—" "I said that's enough," Luke cut her off, his voice dangerously quiet. "Sophie is not up for discussion, and neither is my decision about the North Ridge." Victoria let out a harsh laugh. "Oh, it's not just about the North Ridge anymore. The Reynolds Group caught wind of your little situation. They've revised their offer. They don't just want the North Ridge now, they want to buy controlling interest in the entire ranch." Luke stiffened. "What?" "They smell blood in the water," Victoria said. "They think you're distracted, making decisions based on emotion rather than business sense. And frankly, they're right." She tossed a folder onto Luke's desk. "The offer is for 51% of Willow Creek Ranch, enough to take control of operations while leaving you as a silent partner. It's more than generous." Luke didn't even glance at the folder. "The ranch is not for sale, not the North Ridge, not 1%, and certainly not controlling interest." Victoria shook her head. "The board has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. They're voting on whether to accept the offer." "They can't do that," Luke said. "I own the majority share of the ranch." "Your father's will left 40% of the ranch shares to the company trust, which the board controls," Victoria reminded him. "You own 45%. The remaining 15% belongs to your mother's family trust. If the board votes to sell their shares, the Reynolds Group only needs to convince the trustees to join them, and they'll have control." Luke's face paled slightly. "My mother's trustees would never agree to sell their shares." Victoria's smile was cold. They might if they think the alternative is watching the ranch decline under your unconventional management style. She glanced pointedly at Sophie. The board meeting is at 9 tomorrow morning. I'd suggest you be there, and prepared to make a better case than I'm in love with one of the ranch hands. With that, she turned on her heel and left, the scent of her expensive perfume lingering in the air. Luke stood frozen for a moment, then moved to the window, his shoulders tense. She's bluffing. She has to be. Sophie rose from her chair, unsure what to say. The stakes had suddenly become much higher than a gossipy newspaper article. Luke's entire inheritance, his family legacy, was at risk, and somehow she was at the center of it all. What happens if they vote to sell? She asked quietly. Luke turned back to her, his expression grim. Best case. The Reynolds Group dismantles the working ranch and turns the land into luxury vacation properties. Worst case, they sell it off piece by piece to the highest bidders. And the people who work here? They'd lose their jobs, Luke said. Their homes too, since most of them live on ranch property. Sophie felt sick. This was so much bigger than just the two of them. Dozens of families depended on Willow Creek for their livelihoods. You have to go to that meeting, she said firmly. You have to fight for the ranch. Luke moved to her, taking her hands again. I will, but I need you to know something first. Whatever happens with the ranch, with the board, with any of it, my feelings for you won't change. I meant what I said. Sophie, I love you. Sophie's heart swelled, but a shadow of doubt remained. Luke, I care about you so much, but I don't want to be the reason you lose everything. You wouldn't be, he insisted. This fight was coming one way or another. Victoria and the board have been pushing to sell parts of the ranch since my father died. They never understood why I wanted to preserve it as a working ranch. He pulled her close, his arms strong around her. But you understand. You see the value in this place, in the life we lead here. That's one of the reasons I fell in love with you. Sophie rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. I'm scared, Luke, for you, for the ranch, for us. Me too, he admitted, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. But we'll face it together. The next morning, Sophie insisted on going with Luke to Denver for the board meeting. She wouldn't speak or participate, but she wanted to be there for him. Luke agreed, grateful for her support. The Callahan Enterprises building was a gleaming tower of glass and steel in downtown Denver, a world away from the dusty comfort of Willow Creek Ranch. Sophie felt out of place in the marble lobby, even in the nicest clothes she owned. Beside her, Luke was transformed in his tailored suit, every inch the powerful CEO. Mr. Callahan, the receptionist greeted him as they approached. The board is already assembled in the executive conference room. Thank you, Margaret, Luke replied. He turned to Sophie. You can wait in my office if you'd like. This might take a while. Sophie squeezed his hand. I'll be right here waiting. Good luck. Luke's smile was tight but determined. Thanks. I'll need it. As he walked toward the elevator, his shoulders squared and his head high, Sophie felt a surge of pride and affection. Whatever happened in that boardroom, Luke Callahan was a man worth loving. The hours crept by as Sophie waited in Luke's spacious office. She paced, looked out at the city view, flipped through magazines without reading them. It was nearly noon when the office door finally opened. Luke stood there, his tie loosened, his expression unreadable. It's over. Sophie's heart sank. They voted to sell. To her surprise, Luke's face broke into a tired smile. No, they tried, but I outmaneuvered them. Relief flooded through Sophie. What happened? Luke moved to a sideboard and poured himself a glass of water. Victoria thought she had the votes locked up. What she didn't know was that I spent the night calling every trustee of my mother's family trust, explaining the situation, reminding them of what the ranch meant to my mother. He took a long drink. By morning, I had secured binding pledges from the trustees not to sell their shares under any circumstances. Without their 15%, even if the board voted to sell their 40%, the Reynolds Group wouldn't have controlling interest. So the ranch is safe? Sophie asked. For now, Luke nodded, but it was close. Too close. He crossed to where she stood, taking her hands in his. I realized something during that meeting, Sophie. I've been trying to run the ranch the way my father would have wanted, trying to balance the business side with preserving what my grandfather built. But it's not working. I can't be in two places at once." Sophie felt a flicker of apprehension. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I need to make a choice," Luke replied. "And I choose the ranch, I choose Willow Creek, I choose the life I've been living these past 2 years, the real life, not the corporate game." He took a deep breath. "I'm going to restructure the company. Separate the ranch operations entirely from Callahan Enterprises, keep enough shares in the company to have a say, but step down as CEO and appoint someone who actually wants the job." Sophie stared at him in shock. "Luke, that's a huge decision. Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," he said firmly, "except how I feel about you." Luke led her to the couch and sat beside her, still holding her hands. "These past months, working the ranch, living simply, connecting with the land and the people there, it's given me purpose, Sophie. And meeting you, loving you, it's shown me what really matters." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "I love you, too, Luke. I think I have for a long time, but I don't want you to give up your inheritance, your birthright, because of me." "I'm not giving it up," Luke corrected her. "I'm choosing the part of my birthright that matters most to me, the part my grandfather would have wanted me to choose, the ranch, not the corporation." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Sophie's breath caught in her throat. "I know it's fast," Luke said, his voice suddenly nervous, "and I know we still have a lot to figure out. But I don't want to waste any more time pretending to be someone I'm not, or living a life that doesn't fulfill me." He opened the box, revealing a simple but beautiful diamond ring. "This was my grandmother's ring. My grandfather gave it to her when they first started the ranch together. It's not flashy or extravagant, but it represents a real love and a shared dream." Luke slid from the couch to one knee in front of her. "Sophie Lane, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me at Willow Creek, continuing the legacy of honest work and deep connection to the land? Will you be my partner in all things, just as you've been these past months?" Tears spilled from Sophie's eyes as joy filled her heart. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Luke Callahan. I will marry you." Luke slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a kiss that promised a lifetime of love and partnership. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying a little, Luke rested his forehead against hers. "There's one more thing I need to tell you," he said. Sophie raised an eyebrow. "Another secret?" Luke chuckled. "No more secrets, ever. Just a plan. If you agree, I want to establish a foundation that will protect the ranch forever. A trust that ensures Willow Creek will always remain a working ranch, providing jobs and preserving the land, regardless of what happens to Callahan Enterprises." "That sounds perfect," Sophie said, admiring the way her grandmother's ring caught the light. "A way to honor your grandfather and your family's legacy." "And to build our own legacy," Luke added, his eyes full of love. "Together." 6 months. Later, Sophie stood on the porch of the main ranch house, now her home with Luke, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. So much had changed since that newspaper article had nearly torn them apart. Luke had made good on his promise, restructuring the company and appointing a new CEO while retaining a seat on the board. The Willow Creek Ranch Preservation Trust was now a legal entity, ensuring the land would remain a working ranch in perpetuity. And the Reynolds Group had been forced to look elsewhere for property to develop. Victoria Palmer had resigned as the company's legal counsel, unable to accept the new direction Luke had taken. Her parting words to him had been bitter, but Luke had wished her well, genuinely hoping she would find happiness. As for the ranch hands who had once looked at Sophie with suspicion, they had come around quickly, especially after Luke and Sophie announced their engagement. It was hard to doubt the sincerity of their relationship when they continued to work alongside everyone else, mucking stalls and mending fences, Luke no longer hiding his position, but not flaunting it either. Sophie felt arms wrap around her from behind and smiled as Luke pressed a kiss to her neck. "What are you thinking about, soon-to-be Mrs. Callahan?" he murmured. Sophie leaned back against him, feeling the solid strength of the man she loved. Just how much has changed in a year. When I took this job, I was just looking for a fresh start. I never imagined I'd find a home or you. Luke turned her in his arms, his eyes as blue as the Colorado sky. Best decision I ever made was hiring you, Sophie laughed. You didn't hire me. Frank did. On my recommendation, Luke corrected her with a grin. I saw your application and told him to give you a chance. Best decision I ever made. Second best, Sophie teased, after asking me to marry you. Luke kissed her softly. True, though technically that wasn't a decision. It was inevitable from the moment I met you. Inside they could hear the sounds of the wedding rehearsal dinner being set up. Tomorrow they would be married under the old oak tree, where they had shared lunch that day months ago, surrounded by friends, family, and the ranch hands who had become a kind of family to them both. It wouldn't be a fancy society wedding like Victoria and Luke's father might have imagined for him. Instead, it would be authentic and meaningful, just like their love. Ready to go in? Luke asked, nodding toward the house where their guests would soon arrive. Sophie nodded, slipping her hand into his. Ready. Together, they walked into the warm light of the house, leaving behind the hidden heir who had been afraid to reveal his true self and the guarded woman who had been afraid to open her heart. In their place stood two people who had found in each other not just love, but the courage to be exactly who they were meant to be. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky above Willow Creek Ranch, the land that had brought them together seemed to whisper its approval of the life they were building, a life of purpose, passion, and promises kept. The end.